The Tennessee Titans are in a very unique situation because they have their rookie quarterback in Will Levis playing at a pretty high level, but as a whole roster, it's not the best roster in the NFL. So in today's video, I want to talk about the pros and cons of this Tennessee Titans team, and in the back half of the video, we're going to be talking about how the Tennessee Titans should look to address their current roster problems. So without further ado, let's talk about this Tennessee Titans football team. And I think the best way to start this video off is by talking about the reason why I'm making this video, Will Levis. On the year, Will Levis has a 59% completion percentage, 1,792 total yards, 8 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. And while I must admit Will Levis has been a tad bit more inconsistent than what I would probably like, the signs of being a very good quarterback are there. He's had some very good performances, mainly the performance against the Atlanta Falcons, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and most recently the Miami Dolphins. However, unfortunately, in between those games, he's had some pretty tough matchups, games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Carolina Panthers, and most recently the Houston Texans. He just did not play that well. And that's to be expected from a rookie quarterback. And to be honest with you, the highs that I've seen from Will Levis have made me very excited about his future in the NFL. And like I said earlier in the video, he is the reason why I want to talk about the Tennessee Titans, because I actually think with Will Levis, they have a brighter future than what a lot of people think they do. And if you look at a whole, the entire AFC South is looking super bright. The Houston Texans obviously have their guy in CJ Stroud. The Jacksonville Jaguars are obviously still progressing and going to be a very good team for many years to come. And of course, the Indianapolis Colts are shocking everyone by probably making the playoffs this year. And then you have the Tennessee Titans, and before Will Levis got the start, it was looking like this was going to be the odd child of the AFC South. But with Will Levis, a good coaching staff, and a pretty solid defense, this team has came out of nowhere and actually been relatively competitive. Now, I understand the team is 5-9 and they just lost to the Houston Texans, and I'm not trying to make this team out to be something that they're not. But what I am here to do is to talk about the future of the Tennessee Titans. And that lays in one man's hands, Mike Vrabel. You guys thought I was going to say Will Levis. Well, it definitely falls in his hands too, but Mike Vrabel and the front office are mainly the guys who need to fix this roster. Because currently the current construction of this roster isn't necessarily up to par with what they would probably like it to be. And of course, when you have a young rookie quarterback, you want to have young talent to surround him, as well as have good development programs. Will Levis is not a perfect prospect. As I mentioned earlier, he is extremely inconsistent, and I think with a very good offseason of development, he can be that franchise quarterback. But that's going to come down to coaching, not just the offensive coordinator, but the head coach as well. So let's start this off by talking about the pros and cons of this current Tennessee Titans team. And we'll start off with the cons list because there's a lot less cons than there are pros, and that might seem a little bit shocking, but unfortunately those cons are just massive. The biggest con on this team, the offensive line absolutely sucks. And for the most part, everybody already kind of knew that. Everyone knew this team already had an offensive line problem because these same problems they're having this year, they were having last year. And when you look at the starting 5 offensive linemen they currently have out there, the best one is arguably their center, Aaron Brewer, who has the highest PFF grade along the offensive line with a 70. Outside of that, the only real bright spot for this offensive line is Peter Skoronski as he develops into becoming a pretty decent guard. Jalen Duncan, Dylan Raduns, Aaron Brewer, Daniel Brunskill, they're nothing special. Again, Aaron Brewer is arguably the best guy out there, but I don't think his upside is all that great. I don't necessarily think this offensive line is that bad when it comes to when they run the ball. It's more bad when it comes down to passing the ball. They've already gotten many of their quarterbacks injured, and most recently, Will Levis just got injured. Now, hopefully for Will Levis' sake, that's not going to be a long-term issue. I kind of wouldn't be surprised if they decide to shut him down for the rest of the season so that he can get healthy and come back next year stronger and better, because currently with this current offensive line, they're going to get Will Levis killed. The good news for the Tennessee Titans is that they're going to have their draft picks to fix a lot of their problems along the offensive line. Based off all the mock drafts that I've seen, besides a couple of them, for the most part, everyone has the Tennessee Titans taking an offensive tackle. And the good news for the Titans is that there's a couple offensive tackles that are going to be projected to go in the first round that I think have really good upside. I'm not going to say his first name, but his last name is Fashanu, the offensive tackle for Penn State. He is a total stud. There's also guys like Joe Alt, JC Latham, Amarius Mims, and my favorite prospect that no one's really talking about, but I do think he has the potential, and again, I don't want to say his last name, but it's the BYU offensive tackle with the first name of Kingsley. All these guys are 6'5 plus, over 300 pounds, and all have the potential to be very, very good for this Tennessee Titans offensive line. If it was up to me with the first round pick, I would probably end up taking a guy like Joe Alt or JC Latham or the guy in Penn State if he somehow falls in the draft. And then with my second or third round picks, I'm taking either a guard or another tackle prospect to help this offensive line. I know there's other holes in this team outside of the O-line, but this O-line is freaking bad, dude. The next big con that I have for this team, and maybe it's not necessarily a con more than it is maybe a bit of a bummer more than anything, is the fact they're going to have a ton of veterans potentially leaving this offseason. The biggest name of the veterans who are potentially going to be leaving is, of course, Derrick Henry. I think this would obviously be a bummer because when we think of Derrick Henry, we obviously think of the Tennessee Titans, but the good news is that they do have a replacement in him in Tyjae Spears, who is a completely different player from Derrick Henry. I do think they are going to have to replace that brawler style that Derrick Henry does bring to this team. I do have one player who I do think this team could potentially bring in this offseason who could definitely replace Derrick Henry, and it is my Las Vegas Raiders' Josh Jacobs. I wouldn't give him a big time deal. I'd probably give him a deal worth probably like 2 to 3 years, upwards of about 13 to 14 million. Again, it's not a massive deal, but I guarantee you that there's not going to be many teams who are going to give him this massive contract. And you don't want to take away from what Tyjae Spears can do. You just kind of want to have that 1-2 complement with him and Josh Jacobs. That's just a possible answer to that problem right there, but I do think that is a bit of a problem. And then the next veteran that I completely see leaving is going to be Christian Fulton. Now, I understand Christian Fulton did not have a spectacular year this year. In fact, I do believe that he was benched at some point this season. But what I will say about Fulton is that he does bring a level of experience this current Tennessee Titans defense, especially in the secondary, just doesn't really have a ton of. Sean Murphy-Bunting is obviously going to be their guy moving forward, but they're definitely going to have to bring in some other young talented players along the defense. And looking at Sean Murphy-Bunting, he's also only on a 1-year deal, so you're definitely going to have to bring him back as well. And then you also have to look at DeAndre Hopkins, who's not on a long-term deal either. I wouldn't be shocked if he decides to go to another team as well. So that's just a couple names right there. I'm sure there's going to be a couple other guys that do leave. Again, some of those guys are some guys that you probably want to leave this team, mainly guys like Christian Fulton. But nonetheless, that is going to be a lot of production that is going to end up leaving this roster. The last con I want to talk about is the fact that this team, in my opinion, needs a lot of explosive athletes, and that's mainly on the defensive side of things. Jeffrey Simmons and Azeez Al-Shaair are probably your two most athletic players along the defensive line and linebacking core, but overall, the entire defense as a whole is not very explosive, and it just doesn't have a ton of great athletes. Caleb Farley and Kavon Wallace and Amani Hooker have some athletic abilities, but they're not necessarily special talents. This is a team, in my opinion, that can really benefit from having a generational talent who's just a freak athlete. Look at a guy like Nolan Smith, who I think would have been a great addition to this roster last year. Somebody like that who might fall in the second round or might be there in free agency, who can add a level of athleticism and skill to the defense that just kind of needs some explosive element to it. And the same thing can kind of be said for the offense. You do have some athleticism with guys like Tyjae Spears and Treylon Burks, but I wouldn't be very shocked if they go out there to try to look to find another explosive guy to add to this offense. And with DeAndre Hopkins potentially leaving, you're going to have to fill the void with a number 1 target for Will Levis to get the ball to. But that's kind of it for the cons list. There's a lot more positives to this team than I think a lot of people want to make out to be. And that now brings us to our pros list. My number 1 pro to this team is, of course, Will Levis. Again, he's inconsistent, but he is going to be the future quarterback for at least the next 2 seasons. As long as this guy can continue to progress and get more consistent and better, he's going to be the future guy. The next really big positive thing that they have going for them is they have the most cap space in the NFL next offseason. That is, of course, if you do take off these contracts that you have coming off the books, which from the look of it, I would imagine you're probably not going to re-sign a ton of these guys. Especially if you restructure contracts and give a couple contract extensions here and there, you're going to have a ton of cap space to work with. Now, as it goes of how you're going to actually spend your money, here's a couple names that I think you guys should definitely keep an eye on. T. Higgins is going to be the most coveted offseason receiver that's going to be available. I think Tennessee should definitely go for him if DeAndre Hopkins does become available. Josh Allen, the edge rusher for the Jacksonville Jaguars, would be an absolute massive get for this team. I think it's very likely that Jacksonville is either going to franchise tag him or just overall give him a contract extension, but if he doesn't want to re-sign with Jacksonville, look out for Tennessee. I think if you can't get your hands on Josh Allen, I think Brian Burns would also be a very good pickup for this team. I wouldn't be afraid to give him a 4-year long-term deal. Next is Antoine Winfield. He is a safety that is currently playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It is being projected that he's going to end up getting franchise tags, but I would love to see this team give him a massive contract. Those are 3 guys right there that is going to fix that explosive element that this defense desperately needs. Next is Mike Onwenu. He's an offensive tackle for the New England Patriots, but he's been moved around all over the entire offensive line since his rookie year. He is currently playing the right tackle position, and more than likely, I do think he will fit in at that right tackle spot, especially if they do address the left tackle spot in the draft. He's probably going to warrant a pretty decent sized contract, but I do think Tennessee should be willing to give him that type of money. Then there's Chase Young. This is if you can't get Brian Burns or Josh Allen. He does have the upside to be a very good player. I wouldn't give him anything more than a 2-year deal though. Kevin Zeitler is a very good offensive guard who's been very good for many years in the league. He isn't a guy who you're going to keep around for the next 5 years. He's probably going to retire after a couple seasons, but I do think he was definitely a good player that you could potentially get for pretty cheap overall. And lastly, if you cannot get Antoine Winfield, I would look for Xavier McKinney, the current safety for the New York Giants. I even think if you do get Antoine Winfield, you should still look at Xavier McKinney. He will add to the explosiveness, and I think he's overall a very good coverage safety. Those are just a couple names that I definitely do like. I think they range from guys who you can give long-term deals and even some guys who can give short-term deals. I imagine that Tennessee is definitely going to take a look at all of these guys this offseason, but those are just a couple names that I can come off with the top of my head. So for the Tennessee Titans to become the team that I think they can be, these are the things they have to do. Number 1, they have to use their cap space, and I think it starts this offseason. You have a ton of cap space, give out some contract extensions, go out there in free agency, and be aggressive. Next, this team has to draft better. They have not really been a very good drafting team, but having a top 10 pick means you're going to end up getting a top 10 prospect. As I said throughout the video, go out there and get your franchise left tackle. That's what this team needs to do. Next, as I talked about throughout the video as well, this team has to address their lack of defensive explosiveness. Getting a guy like a Josh Allen, a Brian Burns, an Antoine Winfield, or an Xavier McKinney could definitely add to that explosiveness that this team desperately needs. And the last thing I think this team needs to do is to find replacements for all the veterans that are going to be leaving. That includes DeAndre Hopkins, that includes Derrick Henry, but mainly in the secondary. I know Christian Fulton isn't a special player, but he does have some production for this team. Going out there and getting a cornerback in the draft or in free agency might also be a very good suggestion this team should take. But those are just my 2 cents on the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans fans, you let me know in the comment section below, what did I get right, what did I get wrong, and do you guys think this team has a very bright future moving forward? And for you NFL fans, if you do enjoy NFL content, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because that would help me out a ton. But I love you guys. Peace.